Above the polished set of the political crossfire, bright studio lights glimmered, the seats occupied by eager faces in the audience. A swathe of audience members tittered with anticipation as the camera focused in on the center stage where the show's longtime host, Bret Baier, straightened his tie with a knowing smile. Good evening and welcome to Political Crossfire, where the issues aren't just discussed, no, we hit them head on. He waited until the initial applause faded, then leaned slightly forward, his tone sharp but with an undercurrent of amusement. And tonight we spend time on one of the most divisive questions in American politics. Ukraine aid, lifesaver or millstone? There were whistles from some in the audience, some who cheered, others who opposed her clearly. Bret let the tension hang in the air before continuing. Over the last 2 years, the United States has already written hundreds of billions of dollars from American workers and taxpayers to Ukraine. Some claim it is a crucial commitment to defending democracy. Others describe it as an open-ended money pit that does little to serve American interests. He then took the audience through a shared tale of American struggle as the footage panned across the audience, some nodding, others crossed arms and waiting for the real drama to begin. Bret gestured to his immediate right, where a man in a Navy suit sat, expression calm and guarded. To my right, Senator Adam Schiff, a leading voice of the Democratic Party. Senator Schiff has been an ardent supporter of continued assistance to Ukraine, warning that retreat would weaken NATO and embolden our enemies. He has also been critical of former President Trump's foreign policy. Audible gasps, scattered applause erupted. Schiff put on a little rehearsal smile, the kind only a lifelong politician could wear. Perfect. Now, Bret was looking across the table to the other end, where Tucker Carlson sat, his pen twirled between his fingers, oozing confidence and biding his time. Opposing him. Joining us tonight is Tucker Carlson, Bret carried on, the conservative political commentator, who has said that the aid package is a waste of American resources. Carlson, cool and unflappable, nodded slightly. He believes now is the time to do what is right and put America first and stop sending billions of dollars abroad while Americans are suffering at home. This time, the crowd response was more raucous, even as the applause and jeers were mixed in equal measure. The room crackled with electricity. Bret held a hand up to quiet the crowd, his trademark smirk never leaving his face. So who's right? But who's truly looking out for America's best interests, and who's trading on an agenda at the expense of the American people? He fixed the camera with a penetrating gaze. Let's find out. The camera zoomed in on Adam Schiff. He opened his mouth as if to begin his opening argument. The studio lights dipped a little. The camera panned in on Schiff. As Bret Baier moved in for the first statement, the audience collectively held its breath, supporters and hecklers alike eager for the opening salvo. Everyone realized Schiff wasn't the type to sugarcoat words. Bret turned to the senator with a neutral but quizzical look. Senator Schiff, he started, you've been one of the loudest voices for continuing to supply aid to Ukraine, but you've also been very critical of the manner in which the previous administration executed its foreign policy. Why don't you start us off? Bret said. Adam Schiff fixed his tie and nodded, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for. His tone was firm and measured, but it carried an undercurrent of urgency. Well, Bret, we should disclose everything here. The facts are plain. Donald Trump is operating a protection racket. That's what this is. His tone sharpened. His foreign policy worldview is entirely transactional, reckless, and completely divorced from the image American leadership is supposed to convey. The audience responded right away, applause and scoffs clashing in the air before a tense silence settled over. At the White House, Schiff went on, there is a meeting going on, where the leader of the free world and also, regrettably, Donald Trump will be there. His supporters responded with a ripple of laughter. Schiff let the moment hang, then pressed on. Instead of making alliances, this administration has made U.S. foreign policy for sale. Tucker Carlson, across from him, let out an exaggerated sigh and shook his head while making notes. Schiff didn't flinch. This administration turned its back on our allies in Ukraine, on our NATO partners, all of them. Instead of uniting against an authoritarian menace, they are doing the unimaginable, holding Ukraine responsible for the war. Calling Zelensky a dictator. And, if you can believe it, demanding mineral rights for a security guarantee that isn't even tangible. His voice cut sharper now. This isn't diplomacy. This isn't leadership. It's extortion. The shot cut back to Tucker, who raised his eyebrows but refrained from comment, for now. Brett, ever unflustered, laced his hands and leaned forward. Senator, you've said before that if the U.S. pulled back from Ukraine, it would hurt our standing in the world. Do you believe that's happening already? Brett asked. Schiff exhaled sharply, and his tone changed from sharp to solemn. Absolutely, Brett. It's shameful. After this, I don't know how our partners will trust us. His voice filled with conviction, he paused. That, in my professional lifetime, is the most embarrassed I've been by American foreign policy. We were the linchpin of global stability, and now we're acting like a shakedown artist, shaking down allies for favors while emboldening aggressors. The senator shook his head angrily. And let me be clear, what does Ukraine get out of this deal? What are the real security assurances? What reasonable guarantees have been provided? Now he leaned a little forward, speaking in a lower register, as if sharing a secret with the audience. I have to assume Zelensky walks into that meeting expecting that he's going to have to sacrifice something big, out of goodwill for the president. And let's be honest, Brett, it doesn't seem to exactly be getting anything in exchange. He leaned back in his chair, completing his point. The audience reacted in waves, some murmuring their approval, others scoffing at his open disagreement. Brett paused thoughtfully before turning to his other guest. Tucker, I know you have much on your mind. Let's hear it. The camera panned to Tucker Carlson, who emitted a low chuckle and stretched out his arms before speaking. There, Brett, you have no idea. He sat back in his chair and let out a long breath, as if he had just heard the most absurd thing in the world. Tapping his pen on the table and shaking his head in faux disbelief, he allowed a smirk to crawl onto his face. Then he leaned in, looking down the barrel of the camera. Where do we even begin? With all of this nonsense. The crowd snickered, some applauding in expectancy. Carlson held the moment before facing Schiff again, adopting a look of false sympathy. Senator Schiff, you called Zelensky the leader of the free world. Tucker Carlson leaned in. I mean, I get it. You've got a script to read, though, so let's spend just a minute processing that, shall we? He wiggled a finger as though about to impart some great insight of our time. And as far as I know, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, Zelensky banned the opposition parties in his country. Closed. Gone. He paused for a beat after the statement. He also closed media organizations that criticized him. Do you remember when we called that authoritarianism? Or does that get a pass now that he's the good guy in this story? The audience stirred, some murmur of agreement, some adjusting uncomfortably in their seats. Schiff did not flinch, his face inscrutable. Carlson, however, was not deterred. And by the way, did we mention the best part? He said with a smirk. He canceled elections. Canceled them. The man literally decided that democracy was too much trouble and hit pause on democracy. But absolutely, Carlson said, his voice oozing sarcasm, let's make him the leader of the free world. That's comedy gold, Senator. Comedy gold. Laughter rippled through a section of the audience. Carlson held out his arms, savoring the moment. And somehow, in the middle of all of this, you're sitting here telling us that Trump is running a protection racket. He tilted his head and raised an eyebrow. This is the same guy who's been asking NATO to do their part? The guy who believes America shouldn't be writing blank checks to foreign governments with nothing in return, and he's the one who's been running a racket? Carlson laughed, leaning back in his chair. That's rich, Senator. That's really rich. The camera turned to Schiff. His expression stayed steady, but his fingers gripped the edges of the table a bit tighter than they had moments before. Carlson offered another bemused shake of the head. Listen, he said, you can put lipstick on a pig. But to call Zelensky the leader of the free world is like calling a casino owner the protector of responsible gambling. It just doesn't log, Senator. The audience's response was divided. Cheers erupted from one side, while groans rang out on the other. Sensing the tension spike, Bret Baier leaned forward. All right. We're off to a hell of a start here, he said, trying to corral the room. Senator Schiff, I know you are dying to get in here, so let's go. Schiff tightened his tie, gasping on a few breaths. Oh, I have much to say, Bret. And just like that, we were set for round two. Bret turned to Carlson. Tucker, let's get straight into the drill. Senator Schiff claims that the Trump administration is running a protection racket with Ukraine, squeezing Zelensky for concessions but providing no tangible security guarantees in exchange. Carlson offered a brief, almost theatrical laugh. Oh, Bret, my take? I think this whole premise is absurd. He bent over the table, elbows down. Let me remind everybody, America has been paying the bill for Europe's defense, alone, for decades. He paused, allowing that fact to hang in the air for effect. And now, all of a sudden, when we have plainly started asking rather elementary questions like, oh, I don't know, why do we pay 100% of the bill and Europe just tips the waiter, all of a sudden, we're the ones who are running a protection racket? Really? The camera turned to Schiff, his face impassive even as his fingers gave a light tap on the table. Carlson interpreted this as an invitation to go further. It's much better, and let's give the devil his due, this idea that Trump is somehow extorting or forcing Zelensky to trade on giving something up than getting something. He scoffed. Excuse me, surrendering something for nothing? He shook his head, his tone hardening, his voice cutting through the studio. Do we watch the same war? This war has taken almost 1 million lives, maybe more. And that's what we're calling tragedy? Zelensky making concessions in a peace deal? Schiff, Democrat California, and the man with the blue eyes. Zelensky isn't sacrificing anything except for more bloodshed right now. The audience response was split. Some had clapped, others muttered in dismay. Schiff's jaw clenched, but Carlson pressed on. I mean, at some point you have to ask yourself, what's the end game here? Are we literally doing anything but pouring money into this war forever? Keep sending young Ukrainians to die in a war that, let's be frank, they're not going to win. Schiff adjusted in his seat, inhaling as if thinking it was his turn to jump in, but sensing the tension cascading, Bret Baier upraised a hand to prevent the escalation. Senator Schiff, Bret said in a measured voice, I notice you are prepared to rebut. Go ahead. Schiff let out a sharp breath, readjusting his tie. Oh, you best believe I got something to say. And with that came another heat wave in the room. But Bret, nothing if not a steady moderator, could feel the weight shift on the court and decided to play a little long ball of his own. He leaned back and then forward with both palms on the table. Okay, gentlemen. We've talked Ukraine. We've talked NATO. But let's bring it back home. Well, Tucker, we've got a pretty good argument against this aid package. But let me talk about the American people. And do they really agree with you? Do they want to continue to send money to Ukraine? And Carlson's eyes lit up, like someone who had just been handed a gold-plated opportunity. Oh, Bret, I'm so glad you asked, he said, not wasting any time. Because if there is one thing that gets lost in all of Adam Schiff's theater, it's this: what do the American people actually think? He leaned toward the audience as if he were about to share a secret. So folks, let's pull this thing apart, piece by piece, and absolutely eviscerate all of Adam Shifty Schiff's warmongering nonsense. Schiff let out a quick laugh and shook his head, but Carlson was already pushing on. First of all, and let's get this straight, Schiff's not out here just subverting Trump or the Trump administration, he said, his voice rising. He's subverting the will of the American people. Carlson started counting points on his fingers. Currently, President Trump enjoys a 53% approval rating, the highest he's ever had. And why? Because people grew fatigued of this war. They're sick and tired of the open-ended money maneuver. They're sick of politicians like Schiff spending billions overseas while Americans can't even afford gas and groceries. A murmur passed through the audience. But wait, there's more, he added. 63% of Americans, 63%. Say we need to cut all foreign aid. Not just Ukraine, all of it. And if that wasn't clear enough, 78%, he stressed, let me repeat, 78% of Americans think it's time for a peace deal. Enough is enough. This war has to end. He swiveled sharply toward Schiff. So, Senator, I have a question for you. Schiff folded his arms, then nodded slightly, as if he knew what was about to happen. How do you justify pushing this endless war when the overwhelming majority of Americans, not just conservatives, not just Trump supporters, but people across the board are saying they want out? Schiff uncrossed his arms, straightened his tie and took a slow, measured breath before answering. Tucker, being a leader is about making the difficult choices, even when they're not popular ones. There was some light applause on Schiff's side of the room. Carlson let out a dry laugh. Oh, so democracy doesn't matter anymore? It's about making the tough calls when the people overwhelmingly disagree with you? But then when it fits your agenda, it's all about protecting democracy. Pick a lane, Senator. The atmosphere in the room appeared to thicken. Feeling things were getting a bit hot, Brett Baier raised a hand to slow the escalation. Oh, come on, he said. It seems we have two very different perspectives in play here. Senator, you have made your case. But Tucker, he turned to the commentator, I can tell you're already ready for round two. Tucker Carlson leaned back in his chair a little. He crossed his arms and a sly smile creased his face as he drummed his fingers on the table, just to allow some of the tension to hang in the air. Then he leaned in, speaking slowly, almost playfully. You know, Brett, by now do we even have the right to be surprised? Surprised by what, exactly? Brett asked. With exaggerated flourish, Carlson waved in Schiff's direction, as if to reveal a punchline years in the making. By this, he said. By all of this. By Senator Adam Shifty Schiff standing here, doing what he does best, selling a lie wrapped in self-righteousness. A mix of cheers and jeers rippled through the audience, but Carlson didn't miss a beat. He fixed his gaze right on Schiff, his smile broadening. Let's be real for a second, Senator. Your whole political career has been a lifelong lie to the American people. Schiff let out a short laugh and shook his head. Oh, here we go. No, Carlson replied, don't here we go me. He slapped his hands on the table, his voice tense. Oh, let's go back in time, shall we? You spent years pushing the whole Trump-Russia collusion narrative. Swore up and down that you had incontrovertible evidence that Trump was colluding with Moscow. Guess what? You had nothing. Schiff started to interject, but Carlson raised a hand to halt him. And then there was impeachment. Oh, that was a fun one, Carlson continued, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Another grand performance. Another mountain of indisputable evidence, Carlson said, dripping with sarcasm, that became, wait for it, nothing. He flashed a grin back at Brett. But here's the best part, Brett, he said, heeding to the point. Somehow, Schiff still sits here with a straight face, acting like he's the moral authority on anything. As though we're all just supposed to sit back and nod along as he tells us how to protect democracy and how to trust our allies. Another round of applause rippled through the studio, this time interspersed with some audible groans coming from Schiff's side of the audience. Schiff finally leaned in, his tone cool but biting. You know, Tucker, if you're not the one actually governing, it's easy to sit back and just throw accusations. I've spent my career. Spent your career gaslighting the American public, Carlson interjected, flashing a broad smile. Own it, Senator. It's what you do best. Schiff exhaled, finding his way back. I have spent my career fighting for democracy, he said emphatically. And that's more than I can say for many of the people you appear so quick to defend. Brett, feeling the heat rise again, intervened to chill the scene. All right, gentlemen. I believe we've established that neither of you will be inviting one another to Thanksgiving dinner anytime soon. Scattered chuckles throughout the audience. Carlson settled back in his chair and waved a hand dismissively. Don't worry, Brett. I'm done with bad opinions for the night. He smirked again. And listen, before we completely destroy anything else Adam Schiff says. His voice turned into a playful, mock-infomercial voice. If you're digging this takedown of DC's finest propaganda machine, make sure to subscribe to the show. It really helps us keep our place in the fight against the mainstream spin. A couple more laughs rang out in the audience. Schiff rolled his eyes. Brett Baer looked back and forth between the two men as tension mounted in the room. Schiff sat stiffly, his arms crossed, as Tucker Carlson appeared utterly comfortable. If anything, he appeared to be having a good time. Okay, Brett said, pivoting, let's go back to something that Senator Schiff mentioned earlier. He turned to Tucker. Senator, you've said Trump's attitude on NATO and Ukraine makes foreign policy a protection racket. Tucker, your response? Carlson inhaled sharply, shaking his head like a man tired of even the premise. Oh, Brett, he said, his voice oozing incredulity, this whole protection racket thing is the biggest joke of the night. Laughter rippled across parts of the audience. Carlson leaned forward and pointed at Schiff. You see, the thing that Adam Schiff wants you to believe, the thing that he needs you to believe, is that Trump is extorting Ukraine. That he's shaking them down, ransom for favors. He hesitated, allowing the question to resonate. But what is the real truth? He answered himself. America has been subsidizing Europe's defense for decades. Not a little. Not just lending a hand here and there. We're paying for the whole thing, every single year. Carlson lifted his finger, his voice pointed, precise. The United States pays more for NATO's defense budget than every other NATO country combined, multiplied by 2, and then some. A low murmur went through the crowd. Schiff already shook his head, for he was bracing for the next point, but Carlson was not done. And let's talk numbers, because I know how much Adam Schiff loves his facts, he added with a grin. When you break it all down, the average American taxpayer is spending about $2,800 a year, out of their own pockets, to defend Europe. He allowed the number to hang in the air, directing his gaze toward Schiff squirming in his chair. So let me ask you again, Senator Schiff, who's really running a protection racket here? Schiff finally interjected, his voice taut. Tucker, you are missing the whole point of NATO. I understand the purpose of NATO, Senator, Carlson said, quick and pointed. It's just unfortunate that NATO doesn't seem to get it. Because last I checked, he went on, most of these countries have totally failed to pay their fair share and meet their own defense obligations, you know, like that part, right? Where they were actually supposed to spend on their own defense, not just count on good old Uncle Sam to cover the bill. Schiff opened his mouth to answer, but Carlson was off to the races. And then, God forbid, one president comes in and says, hey, maybe it's time you guys start pulling your weight, and suddenly he's the one running some racket. At that very moment, in a perfect case of according to Hoyle timing, Brett Baer raised his hand to assuage the swelling heat. Okay, he said, calm and collected. I believe we have two very different definitions of what a protection racket is here. The audience laughed. Carlson reclined, patting himself self-satisfied while Schiff inhaled and steadied himself for a rebuttal. However, Carlson, still lounging back, relaxed, let out an exasperated sigh before the man could even finish speaking and put his hand to his temples, like he was trying to comprehend the absurdity of what he was hearing. Then he leaned in and looked Brett in the eye. Brett, let's put aside the noise here. Because honestly, the facts speak for themselves at this point. Schiff crossed his arms and smirked. Oh, I'm certain this will be enlightening. Carlson avoided looking at him directly and spoke with sarcasm-soaked indignation. Here's the reality, folks. For decades, Carlson continued, the United States of America has been carting around Europe's dead weight in NATO. And at last, we had a president willing to say, enough is enough. The audience began to murmur, some in agreement, others with discontent. Schiff remained motionless, but his fingers began gently tapping the table. But hold on a second, Carlson added, let's put NATO aside for a moment and just talk about Ukraine in general, because, spoiler alert, the US isn't just subsidizing Europe's defense. We're also paying for their Ukraine strategy. He leaned in a little, lowering his voice like he was about to tell me classified information. So far, the US has provided Ukraine more funding than every other country in the EU combined. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Schiff shifted in his chair, but Carlson barreled ahead. And wait, it gets better, he said, his voice gaining momentum. 84%. That's correct, 84% of all Ukraine aid has been grants. He paused for that number to sink in. You know what that means? It means no strings attached. No repayment plan. So don't expect to receive anything in return. Just a free ride, paid for by the American taxpayer. Schiff chuckled slightly, shaking his head. Carlson snapped his fingers. But hold on, here's what Europe's done. The Allies' Schiff says we ought to be following blindly? So far, only 65% of their assistance left as grants. The other 35%? Loans. They actually think they'll get that money back. Carlson feigned astonishment, throwing up his hands. So I don't want to sit here again and hear a lecture from Adam Schiff that America is the one running a protection racket. Because if someone's profiting off this war, it sure as hell ain't us. Schiff finally leaned in, firmly interrupting. Tucker, this is not about profit, he said. We're talking about responsibility here. The United States has a responsibility, Schiff said sternly. Oh, an obligation, Carlson repeated, derisively. That's what we're calling it now? Schiff continued, unbothered. Yes. An obligation. Because when democracies are under assault, we don't get to look the other way. That's not who America is. A smattering of applause erupted from Schiff's side of the audience. As Carlson's supporters shook their heads. He leaned forward slightly. Brett, refresh my memory, when did we vote to be Ukraine's personal ATM? Because I must have missed that ballot initiative. The audience reacted with cheers and groans. Ever the moderator, Brett Baer leaned in. Okay, we're clearly getting to the crux of this debate now. He turned toward Schiff. Senator, I know you have more to say. Let's hear it. Schiff had barely begun to explain America's role and responsibility in foreign conflicts before Carlson let out an exaggerated sigh, as if he were trying to help a toddler with basic math. Brett, can I give everyone here a little history lesson? He said, tone cutting. Because apparently Senator Schiff's memory has been a little selective this evening. Brett smirked and then gestured for him to continue. Carlson faced the audience, dripping with sarcasm. You all remember when President Trump told NATO countries they have to start paying what they owe? A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding along, some waiting for the punchline. Carlson grinned. And then magically, you want to know what happened? He leaned in, resting both hands on the table like he was laying the last piece in a mystery. They actually began to give more. The response from the audience was split, applause from one side, scoffs from the other. He pressed his lips into a thin, tight line as Schiff adjusted his tie. But Carlson wasn't done. That, my friends, is called leadership, Carlson said, pointing at Schiff and smirking. And that, Brett, sir, is something that Adam Schiff wouldn't recognize if it hit him in the face. Schiff emitted a sharp laugh and shook his head. Oh, please, Tucker. We're actually pretending Trump's foreign policy was anything other than chaos? Carlson shrugged casually. If chaos means getting our so-called allies to do their jobs for once, then, sure, Schiff, let's call it chaos. Schiff's expression hardened. What Trump did, Tucker, was to weaken our alliances. He threatened NATO members, alienated our closest partners. Oh, well, what did you want instead? Carlson interrupted, tilting his head mockingly. A strongly worded letter, yet again? Maybe a heartfelt plea? Pretty please, Could you guys maybe possibly, like desperately begging here, guys, pay just a tiny wee bit of what we do for your defense? That elicited laughter in some quarters of the audience. Schiff exhaled sharply. Diplomacy is not about threats and intimidation. Carlson snorted. Oh, I see. So it's just America handing out blank checks, while Europe lies around and takes the ride for free? Schiff responded, his voice strong and steady. It's about building partnerships, not making everybody on the planet hate us. Carlson had leaned back and laughed. Right. Because if there's one thing that screams strong partnership, it's Europe forgetting to pay their defense bills until Daddy Trump arrived to collect. There was a roar of the crowd with clapping, laughter, some boos. Brett held up a hand before things devolved too much. All right. I think we've explored the hell out of both interpretations of how NATO contributions went under Trump. The atmosphere in the studio had changed. Laughter and murmurs had given way to something else in the auditorium, edging up a sense that this debate had reached its most raw moment yet. Tucker Carlson inhaled dramatically, rubbed his hands together, and looked at the camera. That trademark smirk of his? Nowhere to be found. This time, there was an edge in Carlson's voice, the kind that cut through the air in the studio like a knife. Folks, he continued, let's be very clear about what's going on here. He paused then, fixing his gaze on Schiff across the table. Because of all the crap that Senator Adam Schiff has thrown out here tonight, this, right here, is the part that disgusted me the most. Schiff barely reacted. But to the discerning eye there was the slightest twitch in his jaw, the sort only an experienced Pole could conceal under the heat of contest. But Carlson continued, his pitch unchanging but cold. You remember what Schiff just said there, no? That there is, somehow, a Trump impetus to get Zelensky to pay anything very, very little. That, my friends, is not only wrong, it's sick. The audience murmured, some shaking their heads in agreement, others waiting for the next blow to land. Millions of people are dead. Hundreds of thousands are dead. Gone. Families shattered. Cities reduced to rubble. And for what? A war they were never going to win anyway. Schiff sat up straighter, taking a breath as if he was about to leap in, but Carlson wouldn't allow him the opportunity. And here's where it should really make your stomach turn. Carlson leaned in and lowered his voice into something almost a growl. Adam Schiff doesn't care. The audience murmured more now, some gasping at the severity of the accusation. Schiff narrowed his eyes but did not respond. He doesn't care about Ukraine, Carlson said, craning his head to the side in faux wonder. If he did, he'd be talking about peace, not pouring more gasoline on a fire that has already consumed a whole generation of young men. He hit the table for emphasis, his voice rising just a bit. He doesn't have a regard for the lives lost. He doesn't care about NATO. And he damn sure doesn't give a damn about America. The statement struck like a hammer. Schiff's lips parted, though his mouth hung there for a moment, paused. Brett Baer, who had been oddly quiet during Carlson's fiery monologue, at last shifted in his seat. Tucker, he said carefully, you're making some serious accusations here. Carlson didn't miss a beat. Am I? So tell me, Brett, what part of that was incorrect? Brett paused, unsure. Schiff, however, didn't. All right. Enough, Tucker, he snapped. You can sit there and make a spectacle of yourself all you want, but the one thing you will not do is question my commitment to democracy, to our allies, to the values that this country stands for. Some scattered applause broke out, along with a few boos. Carlson merely cocked his head, looking at Schiff like a man newly presented a layup. Oh, I'm not doubting it, Senator, he said coolly. I'm stating the obvious. The tension in the studio was palpable. And even normally unflappable and savvy redirector Brett Baer appeared for a moment not to quite know what to do. Schiff took a breath and got his bearings and leaned forward. If you think I'm just going to sit here while you peddle this nonsense, Tucker, then you clearly don't know me very well. Carlson smiled, reclining comfortably. Oh, trust me, Senator. I know you just fine. And boom, the room prepared for impact. It had an electric vibe. Tucker Carlson had nailed a devastating hit, suggesting Adam Schiff was impervious to the human price of war. Schiff's jaw tightened. He looked ready to fire back. But before he could, Carlson leaned in and lowered his voice to something that felt almost conspiratorial. And Brett, he added, glancing sideways at the moderator. Do you know what the worst part is? Brett raised an eyebrow. Enlighten us. Carlson pointed toward Schiff while never taking his eyes off the camera. It doesn't even have to do with Ukraine. Nope, Carlson snorted. No. Let's discuss what this is really about, because Adam Schiff doesn't lie awake at night worried about Ukraine. He had no problem sleeping over NATO. All he cares about is prolonging the war. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Schiff took a deep intake of breath, primed to jump in, but Carlson wasn't finished. Because peace? Carlson leaned forward. Peace doesn't pay him or his donors. The response from the audience was immediate. Some gasped, some cheered. A handful muttered their objections. Schiff leaned back, laughing in disbelief and shaking his head. That's disgusting and completely untrue. Is it? Carlson shot back. Remind me again, Senator, who benefits from this war continuing? Who gets those huge defense contracts? Who profits from the perpetual flow of taxpayer money into the arms industry? He didn't wait for an answer. Well, it certainly isn't the people who are actually fighting this war. Schiff's jaw clenched, but Carlson barreled on, voice steady. Let's be honest, Senator. War is good business. And to have a lot of people in Washington vested in making sure that cash flow doesn't get stopped. Schiff exhaled sharply. His voice was steady, controlled, but strained. You can throw out all the conspiracy theories you want, Tucker. The reality is, this isn't about money. This is about preserving democracy. Carlson snorted. Oh, please. Protecting democracy? That's the little sticker you put on every damn war. So no one asks questions about where the money's really going. Schiff's eyes narrowed, an edge of irritation surfacing. We are supporting Ukraine because it is the right thing to do. Because the eyes of the world are on it. And if America pulls its allies, what does that tell the next aggressor? The world's not watching, Senator, Carlson replied icily. The war industry is watching. And as long as the taxpayer checks keep coming in, they don't care if another 100,000 people die. He leaned in a little bit, voice still sharp. And neither, it appears, do you. The atmosphere in the studio was different now, thick with tension. Even Brett Baer, always quick with a quip to defuse the moment, held back for a long beat before finally clearing his throat. All right, he said softly. I think we've struck a nerve here. He turned to Schiff. I see you're ready to respond, Senator, so I'll turn it over to you. The energy in the room had changed. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It had transcended politics, moved into something deeper, something personal. As always, the composed moderator, Brett took a breath and leaned toward the microphone. Gentlemen, he said, we've been back and forth all day. We've argued about the money, the politics, the war machine. But let's take all of that off the table and get to the one question that really deserves being asked. He paused long enough for the silence to settle. Should we keep supporting Ukraine, or is it time to cut our losses? Schiff, already appearing more intense than he did at the beginning of the evening but remaining calm, went first. Brett, let's be very clear. This is not only about Ukraine. This is a matter of America's credibility. It's about standing by our allies. About ensuring that when a dictator invades a sovereign nation, he does not succeed. He faced the audience, his tone defiant. Because if we walk away now, if we allow Ukraine to fall, what do you think comes next? What signal does that send to China? To Iran? To every authoritarian regime waiting to find out whether the United States still has a spine? Cheers erupted from his supporters. And Schiff pressed on, steady, unwavering. Tucker can put whatever spin on this he wants, but the truth is simple. If we fail Ukraine, we are failing democracy itself. The applause grew louder. Schiff leaned back in the chair, arms crossed, eyes trained on his opponent. Tucker, your response? Carlson let his breath out through his nose, shook his head slowly, and then gave a weary grin. Brett, he said, I appreciate the theatrics. I really do, Carlson said. But let's stop pretending that this war is about saving democracy, because it is not. He looked at the audience, voice steady but forceful. This war was never supposed to happen. But now? It has to end. The room fell quiet. Schiff's expression was inscrutable, but Carlson could read it. He knew. It's over. Ukraine is losing. The world knows it. He let the moment sit. Even Lindsey Graham can figure it out. And guess what? Adam Schiff knows it, too. A ripple, murmurs, whispers, went through the crowd. Schiff nodded but remained silent. And that's why he's in a panic, Carlson went on. That's why he's standing here, reading off these tired, desperate warmongering talking points. Because he knows, what if Trump gets back in office? This war ends. Carlson leaned forward, his voice lowered as if he was letting the audience in on a secret. And he can't do a damn thing about it. Schiff clenched his jaw, saying nothing. The sharpness of his voice softening into something more matter-of-fact, Carlson sat up straighter. Americans, understandably, seek peace. We want this war not to prolong. We don't want any more young men dying thousands of miles away fighting a war they were never going to win. And more than anything, we don't want our tax dollars going to fuel yet another endless foreign war when people back home are struggling to survive. He exhaled, then looked at the camera. So people, let's just take a second. And hope, and perhaps pray, that people like Adam Schiff don't prevail this time around. The crowd's response was instant, cheers and jeers mixing at a volume that seemed to rise above even the noise of the chanting. The gulf had never seemed so wide. Brett Baer, a consummate professional, put a hand up to calm the room. Well, that should do it, he added. Two very different views on what America's role in Ukraine should be. He faced the camera, his voice even, welcoming. Now, it's your turn.